podcast. I'm really excited he can come back and talk to us about camp security. Tell us your role with camp security and how you got involved with this archaeological site.
Currently, I'm a historical researcher for the Friends of Camp Security, which is a nonprofit group that started in the year 2000 to preserve and eventually interpret the site of a Revolutionary War prison camp here in York County, Pennsylvania. I really became involved back when I was in undergraduate school. I was a work-study student working at the Historic Society of York County in the library in 1979. They were doing a major archaeological excavation at the site, and the researchers were coming into the Historical Society to look at resources there. And so the site was only about a mile from where I lived. I became very interested in the site. In my undergraduate education, I did what was called a major honors project, essentially a thesis on camp security as my senior project. And that paper stood as one of the primary histories of the encampment until more recently when other things have been written. So I've been involved with the history of camp security since 1979, basically. I didn't really join the Friends of Camp Security until about 2008, when they were looking to get some more historical expertise on the topic. And the president approached me and said, we'd really like you to come and to just tell us what you know. Well, that grew from telling them what I knew to becoming heavily involved. Now I'm on the board. And my primary role is to do historical research in archives and libraries and so forth. And I do a lot of public speaking on behalf of the Friends of Camp Security about the history of the encampment.
Yeah, that's amazing. And a cautionary tale to be careful to share what we know with people if we don't want to get further involved. But it sounds like it's been a passion project of yours, that you've been interested in. So why does this site matter? Like, what is so important about this? I mean, because like right now it's just dirt. Quite frankly, and I'll take, I think most genealogists are into history, but we'll take the, reluctant, child or spouse who might get taken to this site to go look at it. What is special about this site?
Well, first of all, I want to say, if you go there today, even if you go there today, they are doing archaeological excavation while we are speaking. That looks like the weather was holding enough for them to be out there today.
Okay.
But other than that, if you go out there, all you're going to see is a field. So what does a field tell you? Well, it's probably not that exciting, but camp security is vitally important to the history of the American Revolution for several reasons. One, it was a part of an effort by the Americans to deal with a problem they never anticipated, and that is capturing large numbers of prisoners. And so York County, along with there were prison facilities at Lancaster, Reading, Frederick, Maryland, Winchester, and Charlottesville, Virginia, and there was some also facilities up in New England. So this was part of a series of encampments across the colonies, housing large numbers of British and, other places held German prisoners. So it's important because it's evidence of the beginnings of the bureaucracy of our federal government. How do you deal with a problem that you didn't know what to do with? So that's one thing. The site itself is significant because most of the other prison encampment sites across the United States have been covered by development, and camp security is, we always say, I'm not sure this is absolutely true, but we always say it's the only Revolutionary War prison encampment that has not been covered by development. And so just like we can go into an archives and read documents, we can go into a field that's only been farmed for the past 200 years, dig down into the dirt and uncover documentation about what the camp was like, how large it was, different parts of the camp and so forth. So that's another reason that this site is so significant and that we're so interested in preserving it. And I might also mention that it's not just of interest to York County or Pennsylvania or even the United States. I mean, it's part of United States history, but because British prisoners were held here, and of course, after the war, the British soldiers returned to England, or some of them went to Canada. We have people from particularly England, Canada, and sometimes Australia coming to here to find out about what happened to their ancestors who were in captivity. So it's really an international story, and we're starting to play it up more, particularly as we're approaching the 250th anniversary of our country, because they're going to be celebrating a lot of Revolutionary War things. And here we have the opportunity to, uh, I won't say celebrate a prison camp, but it's an opportunity to have international links to a common experience in Pennsylvania.
I think we like to look at ourselves, they always talk about the Revolutionary War patriots, so the idea that the patriots would be imprisoning people that, it does cause a little bit of distaste in people's mouth, but it's a fact of war.
Right.
You had people who were loyal to the British Crown. Certainly the United States at the time, or America, the patriots weren't really I wouldn't say they weren't really prepared to win. There wasn't really a plan of what to do once they did win, or once they triumphed over the British. Obviously it took almost a decade to get a government really in place that functioned.
Yeah. They definitely were not prepared to deal with the numbers of prisoners that the two largest battles that they captured prisoners at were Saratoga in New York in 1777 and Yorktown in Virginia in 1781. And in each place, they captured several thousand British and German prisoners.
Okay.
And the problem is you're dealing with all of those at one time. Now of course, they had captured prisoners earlier in the war, but they were smaller numbers, and a lot of times they were just housing them in local facilities. So in fact, a recent study came out, and the gentleman was pointing out that when they were very small numbers, they were actually lodging the prisoners in people's homes. And then sometimes they put them in local jails or whatever facilities they had. But now when you're dealing with thousands, you have to have a larger facility.
Yeah, I I didn't realize it was thousands. I need to read closer to the history. Do you have any idea if the conditions at the camp were similar or anything like the rumored conditions at or what we know of the Civil War prisons? That those were tended to be pretty horrific from.
Well, I would say conditions were probably not good, but it wasn't necessarily their intention. It's again, you don't have a bureaucracy in place.
Right.
You don't have a steady means of supply. Camp security throughout its history. Now, camp security was established in the summer of 1781, so you're getting near the end of what they consider the fighting part of the war. The war didn't actually end until 1783.
Right.
So throughout its history, from 1781 to 1783, there were problems with supplies at camp security. They were bringing food in from the local area, which was one of the reasons the camp security was established in Pennsylvania, in York County, is because George Washington felt that this area had not been as heavily hit by the war as some other parts of the colonies. And they were bringing, beef from the local farms to feed these people. But even so, there are accounts where people are saying they're just not getting fed. The supplies aren't getting there. And the first prisoners to arrive were those that were captured at the Battle of Saratoga under what was known as a convention. And they were called the Convention Army. And the convention was not an official surrender. It was kind of a deal that the Americans made with the British that, you get some special privileges. You're not going to be in captivity too long. We'll try to march you back to another port, and you just leave the colonies. Well, that never happened because Congress thought the convention was too lenient. And as a result, these men stayed in captivity from 1779 until the end of the war. And part of the convention was the British were supposed to provide supplies for the prisoners that were in American captivity. Well, there were always problems with getting the supplies from the British lines to their prisoners. And one of my favorite stories about camp security is there was a shipment of supplies coming from I think it was from along the Delaware River somewhere. The British had unloaded supplies through Chester County to York County. Well, the sheriff of Chester County, Pennsylvania, he claims that these supplies were going to help the British, help the British side somehow. But actually what he was doing is he was confiscating supplies and selling them on the black market. And they never made it to York County. And so there was a whole basically wagon train load of stuff that never made it to camp security, and that's just one supply problem that they faced.
Yeah.
Um,
It's that sounds like wartime, all right.
yeah,
Somebody confiscates supplies and sells them on the black market. That sounds like every other wartime story. It's chaos. It's people doing what they want for themselves,
right.
not for, it's never a neat and orderly, two sides perfectly fighting. There's always like a third side, or maybe even a fourth, a third side trying to stay neutral and a fourth side trying to benefit from the whole thing, financially and everything. The history on your website notes that the first sort of archaeological work or exploration began in 1979. That's when it started. It's been a long time, right, that this has been poked at and prodded and explored and studied and everything. So what's going on that it's taking so long, I guess?
Well, first of
And this is
all,
a dangerous question, I understand. I know these things aren't simple. I think if this was a site where there was construction about to occur on the site, it would probably go faster because the builder would want to be able
well,
to.
that's actually what stimulated both
Oh,
periods
okay.
of archaeological excavation. 1979, there was a concern about a development going in that area,
Oh,
and so that's when they did that dig in 79. But the land was in private hands until about 2000. I'm going to say 2010 was when we had the first deed. The final deeds weren't signed until 2013. So the one of the issues was the land was in private hands, and of course, a lot of the land, in fact, where we're working right now, was owned by a farmer who was farming the land, and you don't want to have people digging if you want to
right,
make a crop off of your land. So
right.
that was the first issue was it was in private hands, um, and then in 1999, a developer bought the land, and he was going to put a development on actually some of the areas where we're digging now. And that's what prompted the formation of the Friends of Camp Security to oppose that development and to try to purchase the land from the developer and somehow make it uh, either preserve it as a private preserve or in public lands. And what happened was the Friends of Camp Security put together a consortium of public and private groups and also solicited private donations through the Conservation Fund of Pennsylvania. We were able to combine all these resources, purchase the land, and then the land was given to Spring and Sperry Township to be its owner and manager. So currently, it's called the Camp Security Preservation Area is under the ownership and management of Spring and Sperry Township. We are exploring the possibility of having it designated as a national park. We're not sure where that's going to go. I mean, that may be a long and
Yeah.
arduous process. But currently, I feel that Spring and Sperry Township, they've been very good at working with us to allow archaeological investigation. They allow us to have some public programs on the site. Um, I think the township is proud of what they've done
Right.
because it's bringing recognition to like I said, international recognition to this area. So that's been a pretty good partnership for us. So that's kind of the ownership was one issue. The other issue was camp security was a complex. It wasn't just a one structure or, it wasn't just a building. There was a stockaded area that had huts inside of it. And also there was a less well guarded village site outside the stockade. There might have been more than one stockade, according to some accounts. In 1979, we believe they uncovered the unguarded village, or at least some work areas associated with the village. But the location of stockade has always been the holy grail of camp security's history. Where was this stockade located? Because the stockade was the primary feature of the encampment. And we had two different digital surveys, one using electromagnetometer, I believe they called it. We did also ground penetrating radar. And those surveys were inconclusive as to where the stockade was. And that we got what were called hot spots And we dug there, and it turned out that they were either geological
Hmm.
features or soil, had something to do with the soil composition. And finally, in 2022, we got lucky, I guess you might say, and encountered the Stockade Trench with the evidences of post holes in the trench, which would be the evidence of the stockade. And so since 2022, the archaeologist has been trying to track the outline of the stockade. That's one of our first goals, is to establish the perimeter of the stockade, see how large it was, what shape it was, where the main gate might have been, and so forth. In a presentation we did earlier this week, somebody asked about latrines. I mean, everybody has to go to the bathroom, right? And they have to go to the
Right.
bathroom somewhere.
Right.
And generally latrines are dug into the subsoil. I mean, they're usually dug 4 or 5 feet at least, sometimes deeper. And we'd love to find latrines because that would give us some more information. And generally latrines are places where they're also throwing refuse, which might include
Yeah.
artifacts that would be helpful. So once we establish a perimeter of stockade, hopefully it might lead us to where the latrines, there's references to wells being dug. We should find some wells on the site as well. Although there is a stream that runs close to the stockade site as well as a spring. So there are water sources. And when they did one of the whatever they call it, survey, the gentleman who did that said he found evidence of other old springs that are now dried up on the
Mm.
hillside. So, there was a good bit of water on the site, which is probably one of the reasons it was selected, because they would have water sources for the prisoners. The way they would have constructed the walls of the stockade would have been to dig a trench,
Yeah.
set the posts in that trench, and backfill against the posts. So,
Okay.
so what we have uncovered is the trench that was dug for the
Okay.
posts, and then the evidence of the post holes themselves. Now,
Nice.
there
Okay.
is a historical record that after the camp was emptied in May of 1783, the local farmers came and took the wood for either firewood or fences.
Okay.
So we're not finding post molds per se. I mean, we're just finding where the hole would have been. And in fact, the archaeologist is probably the only person who can figure, because I've helped with some of these digs, and when you get down to that point, it's just a matter of feeling the difference in the texture of the dirt. Sometimes there's a slight difference in the color. More often, it's more of a texture thing. Identifying them, he and the professional. We have one chief archaeologist, and he usually has 1 or 2 assistants who are professionals. And then most of the digging work, the handwork, is done by volunteers, including myself. So volunteers strip off the topsoil, they dig down to the subsoil, and then some of the more talented volunteers will help with finding the post holes. I'm too rough for that, so when I help, they usually keep me at the top part of it, because keep on getting accused of digging too fast, too deep. And I really appreciate the care that the archaeologists have shown to try to document this carefully.
Yeah, they give you another history book to read, or
Yes.
tell you to go do some more research. I get that. The latrine comment too, for people that aren't familiar with Philadelphia history, a lot of the archaeological work there has been done in latrines, and that's where they found, like, most of Philadelphia's colonial history was in latrines, pottery, coins, other household objects that were all tossed, and that's all they found, and what you'll find displayed at in museums in Philadelphia. I do have a question too for our international audience, and for people here in the U.S. in terms of the genealogy attachment to the site. How would people find out if they had a prisoner there, or if one of their family was a soldier who was doing the imprisoning, I guess, at the site? Where would they find that? Because I've noticed on the website you did post a lot of genealogical stuff, which I think is fantastic. But maybe just point that out or explain it to
Sure.
people. Yeah.
Let me start with the guards. There were 3 different groups of men who guarded camp security. Initially, it was guarded by York County Militia.
Mm.
We have lots of records from the York County Militia. Most of them are held by the Pennsylvania State Archives. And if you go to the website for camp security, which is campsecurity.org, you will see transcriptions of some of the lists. Now, I will emphasize what's on our website is only a portion of what is available.
Uh,
There are other records, and we're always collecting the stories of people who say, well, my ancestor was a guard at camp security. If his name is not on a list that we have, we will try to research it and verify that. In 1782, the militia was replaced by a Continental Regiment under the command of Colonel Moses Hazen, known as Congress's own. It was one of the few regiments that was actually funded by Congress rather than by the states. And we have some returns from that regiment. There have been some books written about Hazen's regiment, which you'll find names in. I think he only stationed one, maybe two companies at Camp Security because he was headquartered in Lancaster, and he was responsible for guarding the prisoners at Lancaster, York, and Reading. So he only sent part of his command here to York County. We do have some names of men who were stationed here in York County from that regiment, but we've focused primarily in the past on the militia. The third group, Hazen's regiment, returned to line duty in October. Well, actually, they left October 31st, 1782, and they were replaced by a provisional Pennsylvania Line Regiment out of Carlisle under the command of Colonel Richard Butler. I've been unable to find any lists of men in Butler's regiment, primarily because the Continental Line was sort of reorganized, I think, I want to say 1780 or somewhere later in the war. And these provisional regiments don't have a lot of records. I mean, neither the State Archives nor the National Archives has much on Butler's regiment. Although we just learned about that not too long ago, that's another avenue that I'm really pursuing more in my research now and in the future. So we might have more about that. I'm hoping, hopefully starting in June, to develop a database of all the guards that were at Camp Security, and then that database will indicate the man's name, his unit affiliation, and the documentation we have for that. We can put that on our website, and then if people have a question, they go there and say, oh, well, I see my ancestor's name, and this is where I can find documentation he was a guard there. Although if you have ancestors who you think were guards at Camp Security, please contact us. We'd like to know about that. Prisoners are a different story. I hope the British people, any British people who are listening to this don't get offended, but I always say that the American Revolution was to England that the same as Vietnam was to the United States. It was kind of like they didn't put enough resources into it. It wasn't a war they really wanted to be involved in, and they kind of people felt bad about it. And I mean, and so when you study, at least what I've read and seen of British regimental histories, they kind of skip over the Revolutionary War because it was not the most glorious part of their history. They like to focus on the Napoleonic era in particular because
right.
then they were the winners.
Yeah. Let's hear about Lord Nelson again.
Yeah. So I have found very few, and maybe I'm looking in the wrong place, but I've found very few actual muster rolls for British regiments for the period that they were at Camp Security. There are some lists where they'll returns where they'll list men who are still on active duty with the British Army, and they'll say how many were in captivity, but they don't give their names. We do have some clothing returns from British records that list names of individuals. I'm hoping again to develop a database of those. We do have some individual accounts of men who were at camp, of prisoners who were at Camp Security. On the good hand, the British tended to be more literate than the Americans, and so a number of them wrote accounts about their experiences, which has given us a good source of information. That and pension records at the National Archives for men who were guards at Camp Security. So if you have an ancestor you think was a prisoner at Camp Security, you can contact us. We'll check the few lists that we have to see if his name shows up. But again, that doesn't mean he wasn't there. It just means we don't have his name on a list. And many men died there. So a lot of lists that we have, the clothing returns date from either 1782 or 1783, anywhere from 6 months to a year after the camp was established. And the prisoners who arrived there earlier on, many of them suffered illness and a number of them died. I mean, we estimate that possibly as many as 400 people died out there. We're
Oh,
just
wow.
there.
Eh,
Yeah.
Where are they buried? Like,
That's a good question.
oh, okay.
That's another thing we're working on.
Okay.
One prisoner said that there was a cemetery of about a quarter an acre located about a quarter of a mile from the camp.
Oh boy.
We have
Okay.
been told by local people where they believe the cemetery is located. We think we know where it might have been. Unfortunately, the site of the cemetery is now underneath a development. And so unless people who are living there see ghosts, we're not prepared to go ask them to dig in their front or backyard to see if we can uncover bones. There's a lot of interest in camp security in that area. And I think some of them know that the camp in some way may have impacted their property.
Yeah.
Um, and there are ghost stories associated with camp security. In fact, if you pick up some of these more popular books on ghosts in Pennsylvania, depending on the book, you will find a ghost story about camp security in there. So,
Oh, that's excellent. We all love a good ghost story for sure. My last question to you involves this, America's 250th and, all the excitement around the revolution and people wanting to visit and reconnect with these Revolutionary War roots and hopefully even our British friends. If somebody just drop by the site and walk around and look and take pictures, or, what are the rules and how would you visit, and get further involved if you wanted to get further involved with the organization?
well, let me take that question first. To get further
Yeah,
involved,
yeah.
just go to our website, campsecurity.org. Right now, the best way to get involved is to contribute money. Um, it's an all volunteer organization,
Yeah.
and everything, I mean, all these archaeological excavations cost money. We've raised funds, we've gotten grants, but there is no office, there is no building that's the Friends of Camp Security. It's just a couple of us who work towards this end. Um, so we rely again on donations and contributions and memberships to do that.
Mm.
We do use volunteers in archaeological digs every year, and they can register on the website for that. Although I do not recommend that for you if you have any kind of physical issues, because it can be hard work. I mean, it's digging, it's sifting, it's bending, lifting. Um, each year when we do an archaeological dig, we have what's called a public day. That's the only time that you can actually get to the site of the excavation, because it's back in the middle of some fields which are relatively inaccessible. This year, with the rain that we've had, it's been a challenge. In fact, they've had a couple of vehicles get stuck this year.
Oh,
So what we do on public days, we get four-wheel drives and we actually shuttle people from a safe place to park back to the site and then back again. As of right now, you can't walk. Well, you can walk to the site, but we're not encouraging that because we don't want relic hunters and so forth back there. Plus, it's still being farmed, so when we're not doing archaeological excavations, the farmer is growing some sort of crop on there. We don't want his crop being trampled down by people. However, you can see the part of the site from the road along the eastern side of the preservation area called Locust Grove Road. There's a church there. You can pull in their parking lot. And if you look to the west, you'll basically see the terrain, which is what's on the screen behind the background behind me is the terrain of camp security. At the north end of the site is a small township park. Now, that's not directly on the land where the stockade or any of the structure stood, but if you go to that park and they have a trail that goes back into the woods a little bit and go to the edge of the woods, you can look up towards the camp security site.
oh, okay.
Probably um, one of the next things we might do is try to maybe get an interpretive sign at that park to tell people about camp security. I know we were talking about at our meeting this week what we could do with what we have right now.
Mm.
And one last thing I should mention is Spring-Sperry Township currently is in the process of developing a master plan for the entire preservation area and the township park. And that master plan will provide the guidelines for what will be done with this property in the future. I'm on the committee to develop the master plan, as are at least one or two other members of the Friends of Camp Security. And what we are thinking right now, and this is just pure speculation, but we are thinking right now is probably sometime in the future, especially as archaeology uncovers more of the site, that we will have walking trails up to the site and possibly some small signage. That'll probably be the extent of. We're not going to try to reconstruct the site. We're not going to try to commercialize it. We basically want to keep it as low maintenance as possible for the township, and we don't want to put anything up there that would misrepresent. We don't know what the camp looked like. We don't know what the structures looked like. We don't want to put something up there that's not historically accurate. Plus, we don't want the township to have to maintain wooden buildings, which are going to be subject to deterioration, termites over time. So we're just thinking walking trails and a little bit of signage probably for the future. We also, you mentioned the 250th anniversary. We're looking at the possibility of having some sort of celebration or recognition, probably at the small township park. We have interest from a British reenactment group. We also have a local middle school that has a colonial fife and drum corps that has offered to participate in an event that we asked them to attend.
Oh, fun.
We're aware of some militia reenactors who might be interested in participating. So we have groups that could come. We could have a nice little event where that may be something that we're going to try to plan for the 250th.
Oh, that'd be great. Oh, that would be fun. Yeah, I think it is a point of pride, as you mentioned, and I think, pointing these sites out are wonderful. Yeah, I grew up in Montgomery County, where George Washington slept a lot of places, and was driven around by the British, driven out of places by the British, and I just thought that was normal, and then you talk to people that live in the rest of the country, and it's like not normal to live amongst history. So I think anytime you can celebrate it and invite people to get a peek at it, I think it's always great. It's always great. Well, Jonathan, was there anything else that you wanted to share about camp security before we sign off for this episode?
This is a good example of something that's important to our history, but is so little well known. And I think as historians and genealogists, we need to keep that in mind, that there's a lot of things like this that we really need to make people aware of. And it's not, I always like, other people stress various aspects of the history of the camp. I always like to stress the aspect of this is where our federal government began. I mean, when we're talking about bureaucracy today, it started back here. How do you deal with these types of issues? Right. And of course, the big growth of bureaucracy occurred during the Civil War, but it had its roots back during the Revolutionary War, when they're trying to figure all these things out, how a fledgling government is going to put together something that's going to manage a country going forward. So, right.
That is great. And your statement about keeping your mind open to things that you're going to discover in the past that you didn't, because the history that you learned in school was brief. You just got the highlights, and when you do genealogy, you're deep in the details for sure, in history. So, Jonathan, I wanted to thank you again for filling us in on this camp. We're looking forward to whatever you do for the 250th. Keep us informed.
Sure.
And I hope everyone who has relatives, I should say ancestors, not like they're alive now, unless there are ghosts on the site. But if they have ancestors at the site, to go ahead and contact you and become a member and support your ongoing efforts, so we can preserve this part of the nation's history, not just Pennsylvania's history, for future generations. Thank you.
Thank you, Denise.